Okay, so welcome to the sermon part of the service, and we are doing seasons. See if my clicker works today. Oh, that's the point. Nope. All right, Alicia, it's me and you. All right. So these are some seasons you might be familiar with here in Louisiana: winter, spring, fall, football, Mardi Gras, crawfish season. We don't have a whole lot of snowball season over here, but yeah, and so things kind of, it's kind of a meme that's going around. We also have two seasons that is like hot and then winter for one day. So those are some things that we experience locally as seasons. Lonnie talked to us about seasons that we experience that are kind of in nature, and he shared it as they link to the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so these seasons and the ones before are linked to chronos. So they're like time seasons where something, the spring's going to happen, then summer's going to happen. Like they just continue on through time. It's called chronos. And I love these seasons because I know there was a time in my life that I struggled with postpartum depression, and I would have to just be outside. Like I just get outside. The air was better outside than it was in my house. And so I don't know if that makes it a thin place like church, but like being outside in nature, it would be like midnight for me, and I would go outside and see the moon. And just the fact that life was continuing, even though I was struggling, made me feel so comforted. It's like, okay, God's still here. He's still doing things. I've felt like things were happening, not just in the isolation of myself and, what was happening for me. Okay, so we're going to talk about a few seasons that we've had at Luke. So there's all kind of different seasons. Some of you may remember these very well, and some of these might be new for you. We had fun brainstorming them the other day. All right, so a long time ago, we had Circle Church, which, let me back up first and explain. So seasons at Luke sometimes came with a perceived bad connotation, because Leslie would say, hey guys, we're going to do this, but it'll just be for a season. Everybody would be like, oh, we don't want to do this. It's just for a season, just for a season. So whenever that's said, it just makes me chuckle inside. So Circle Church was one of those. And so what we did was, instead of having the sanctuary set up like it is now, it turned and made like concentric circles. So basically the person who was delivering the sermon would stand in the middle, and you could see everybody. So I could see the people across from me the whole time during church. It was a very uncomfortable, you're like, there goes Shannon wiping her nose. There's so-and-so. Like, it was just, like you're just, it's very different. But it was wonderful. It was. All right. We also had a season of brown where God spoke to Leslie, and she was to wear brown. For how long for Leslie? 8 years. 8 years. That's a long season. So one of my friends who doesn't go to Luke said, I thought she was just preppy. No, God spoke to her, and she, and she was obedient and faithful that season. Lots learned out of that season. Another season was when the elders were wearing robes. That was super fun. Fun, good times, right, Nancy? So we wore the full vestments to church on Sundays, and we've always kind of been a blue jeans kind of church, and to come in the big gowns, and the everything, and it was, but we were faithful to listening to what God had called us to. Hemming and hawing, we still showed up in our robes. We also had church at Leaps and Bounds due to the flood. So that was for maybe 7 or 8 months, something like that, while our church was being restored here. I remember Ellen DeMaria said we had church between the trash cans. It was awesome. We also had Friday night worship. So we would have worship times. I think Chris Martin was in charge of them, and I would have them for 3 hours on Friday night. So we'd go from like 8 o'clock to like 11 o'clock at night. Come and go, just fun, wild worship. I say wild, I feel like it was wild. It was wonderful and wild to me. We also had a season where Leslie worked at Shoney's to minister. Do you remember? Some of you remember those? So at the time, we had Leslie worked on. We had a pastor that worked only here at Luke, and so she also took a job at Shoney's so that she could minister and she could learn. Had a season for her of learning over there, and so it was so unusual to say my pastor also works at Shoney's, but it was a great season. Again, listening, obedient, faithful, learning. We also had house church, which I was totally not for. And we didn't meet at church. We met in people's homes, and different ministers would go and preach at that home. And I was like, oh, gosh, thank goodness. Not for anybody else was bad, but it felt so unusual, so weird to me. So, I don't know what it's going to be like. Here we go. It's going to be awkward. And then we had seasons without Wednesday nights. So we've had that here. We experienced that recently, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, where we went through a season of nothing on Wednesday nights. And at our old location, we had Wednesday nights. They looked different, but there was a time where they looked like we had a small worship service, somebody would give a testimony, and then we had small groups afterwards, and everybody had a small group. We even had a small group for people who didn't have a small group. That was your group. And so everybody, one Sunday I remember we also had a lot of people that would just walk up to church, and they had a lady that walked up and she was high on something. And I was like, oh, you can be in my small group. I'm like, come sit next to me. So there was a group for everybody. And during that time, I felt we would meet in different places, and my small group was very precious to me, very special to me. And we would meet for, I didn't have any children, so we had lots of time. I don't know what everybody else did, but lots of time to spend, with this. But so we had, so this was all Kairos time. So we talked about Chronos time, and this is Kairos time, which we're going to talk about. So there are two different forms of time. But in my small group, we got to really know each other, love each other, helped each other function through pretty much everything. There was not much that was off limits. And so it was a beautiful time of learning. Well, one of my friends, Vicki, I don't know if you remember Vicki, but she told me she's moving. And I was like, oh, no, you cannot move. You cannot, this is working, and it's good, and you cannot move. And she was going to take care of her grandparents. And I was like, that's just not going to work, because I need you here, you're part of this group. And she was like, she would just so sweet and kindly just kind of, help me along. No, Michelle, I am leaving. I am moving. I wish I could stay. This is just where God has me. And I just was not happy with where God had her, because it wasn't with me. And so, I was like, all right, anything I could do about it. So I just kind of moved on with it. Then another person in my group, Tracy, moved to Shreveport, which I also, by this time, it's been 4 or 5 years in between there, so I was a little bit better about the move to Shreveport, because I knew it was going to be the best thing for her family, for John Craig, her son, to be able to ride four-wheelers and, be the boy that he was. And so I learned to be okay in these places, and I learned that people are for a season. So that's everybody. That's not just people who move away. Like, every one of us has an expiration date to us. So we are not infinite here on earth. We are finite here on earth. So whether it be a separation through death, whether it be a separation through moving, whether it be a separation through groups that you're changing, people are for a season. What was so special to me about Tracy was, as I mentioned before, when I had postpartum, like, Tracy was my right-hand person. She was in charge of me 24/7. And so actually there was like 5 hours that she wasn't in charge of me, that I couldn't call her from midnight to 5:30 in the morning. But all the other hours of the day, she was available to me. And so she just got me through this such a hard place. I would ask Greg. Greg would be so kind to me and say, Michelle, what do you need? I'll do whatever. I'll, give you whatever. And I'm like, can I just call my friend Tracy? He's like, please call her. Please call her. So I would, call, and she would, be able to get me through the moment. And then one time she went out of town, and so she assigned me to Leslie and Nancy, so they were on call for the weekend for me, because I was that much in need of just constant supervision and support. And so when she moved to Shreveport, I was just thinking, like, how is this going to work? How is this, and I know that others have experienced that. When Deborah moved to Arkansas, it was the same thing. Like, it's what God and they are needing and wanting, but it doesn't always feel fabulous for us that are still here, And so, but the thing that I've learned is that people are for a season. And now I can see that God put Tracy in my life for that season to get me through that rough spot, because I needed it. I needed her to be like where I could touch her. And now I don't have to be able to touch her. I still get to see her on occasions. But even through death, like, God is like, I have prepared something for you. Like, you don't have to fear that maybe your spouse isn't here, or your mom's not here, or whoever, because I still have you. I'm preparing you. I'm carrying you. It's me that you need, and it can be through other people that he uses to be the hands and the feet, but it's me that you need. So, all right, so this is a Hebrew word, moedim, and this is the word for seasons, one of the words for seasons as it gets translated into the English language. And moedim means appointed times, something that you're going to remember, okay? To know that you have an appointment with God. And also, it's oftentimes linked to blessings. So, in the very beginning of Genesis, it talks about, that's the first place moedim shows up in the creation story. So it says in Genesis 1:14, and God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. And when I first looked at that, I've always thought about winter, spring, summer, fall, because that's what we think in our Western culture of seasons. But that's not what God, there's a different word for that in Hebrew, and that's not the one that was put there. It's moedim, and it's for appointed times. Okay, so let the stars and all of that be for signs and appointed times, for days and for years. Then another place that it's used is in Leviticus 23:1. And the Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites and say to them, these are my appointed festivals, the appointed festivals of the Lord, which you are to proclaim to sacred assemblies. Okay, so this is another use of moedim, another time for seasons that doesn't have to do with, the leaves falling and the nature part of seasons. Because these are the times when we're going to set it aside. We're going to come, it's a special calling to come back to what, to what God is saying you will be able to proclaim to the sacred assemblies, okay? So like Christmas, Passover, those things are sacred times. So seasons are sacred and set apart. So I was talking to Vicki, which I haven't talked to Vicki in probably, I don't know, a good 7 or 8 years. It's been a long time since I talked to her, but I was talking to her the other day, and it was just so cool how it was just right back to the same kind of closeness and intimacy that we had before. And so I was telling her, I was like, I'm going to be, preaching, and it's so funny that we're on the phone with each other because I'm going to be talking about you. So we were talking about seasons, and she said, yeah, God's got new chapters and new plots. So he's going to be continuing, God makes all things new. There's, he's constantly giving us new things. And so, so in the learning that people are all for a season and that God is making all things new, we can get scared about that and be like, I don't like change. I don't like Circle Church. I don't like wearing this robe or whatever God is calling us to in the moment. Know that it's linked to blessings. Like God's got something for you in it. And I can say in all those experiences that I had listed up there through Luke, we definitely learned something through that, even though it was awkward. There was lots of wonderful times. You could call a bunch of different seasons. We had handbell season. We had seasons with the choir who sang. There were lots of wonderful times as well that are seasonal. But the ones that I remember are the ones that seem kind of strange, are the ones we grew from, and there was this blessing that came out of it. So in my house, I wanted to share in closing with you. In my house, I have this picture on the wall. And it has it also has my little Emmett heart on it, and it has my dove that Tara gave us from Women's Night. But it says, I trust the next chapter because I know the author. So whatever season that we are in, whatever is going on, whatever change is about to happen, we know that God has got us, that he is taking care of all the details that are to come. We don't have to fear because God is writing our book. In Jesus' name, amen.